Here you can actually see I pulled up one of our cards for a creature, and it's got a couple of different numbers that are labeled here for parts of the card. As you'll see, the one that's labeled number 1 is the spell type logo. Each type of spell is going to have a separate logo here, and it's going to help you to determine where the card's actually going to go in relativity to the game board when you're using the deck building side of the board. Number 2, you can see here's the casting cost. That's the actual energy that it costs to actually cast the spell. Number 3 here, you can actually see the name of the card. So each card's going to be unique. This one is Gorvax the Dragon. If you look at number 4, you can actually see this is where all of the spell effects and creature abilities are actually going to be taking place. This card has a relatively easy ability. It's just wings, meaning that he flies. But there are other cards that have lots of other descriptions here of things that they do and some of those effects and abilities that they have. So this is where everything is going to go. If you look at number 5 here, this is actually going to give you a little bit more detail on the type of card. There's a couple of different kinds of cards that fall into the same category. So in particular, this spell is a creature, and the subtype of it is a dragon. As you can see up at the top, again with number 1, that's going to show the logo of the creature. Every creature is going to have this logo, but there are some spells that are going to share this logo, even though they're a little bit different subtype of those kinds of cards. You'll be able to cover more of that as you look at cards or as you read the rules. Number 6 here is going to go over the creature's attack. Now this is going to be specific to a creature card. If it's not a creature card, this is not going to be here. And same thing with 7, this is going to show the creature's defense, which is the amount of damage that that creature can take before being sent to the discard pile as it dies. Again, unique to a creature card, 6 and 7 will not be on every card, but I wanted to show you a creature card because it has the most breakdown of any particular card. So let's move on. Let's talk about the 5 different kinds of spells that you can cast in Duel of the Magi. The first thing we're going to go over is power sources and energy surges. Now again, each one of these cards is going to have that purple lightning bolt in the top left-hand corner. And again, even though they're 2 different types of cards or subtypes of cards, they're going to be sorted together on the deck building side. So power sources are permanent energy spells that are used to cast spells. A power source can only be played during the resource step. Energy surges are quick bursts of energy or are used to acquire additional power sources. Energy surges can be used during the resource step, during the spellcasting step, or any time a response could be played. Players cannot respond to a player using a power source or an energy source. It literally just happens, and you're going to cast whatever spell afterwards when you use these energies. And then the final thing that happens is energy that's provided by both of these types of cards can be used at any time during the turn. But at the turn, as soon as you hit the discard step, all that energy is going to dissipate at that part in the turn. Let's move on to response spells. As you can see up in the top left-hand corner, you can see it looks a little bit different with the like green, I don't know what this is, like fireball or something. It looks cool anyways. So response spells can be cast as a reaction to another spell being cast. They cannot be cast at any other time. So you couldn't just cast this spell just to cast it. There has to be a spell cast before it, and all players are going to get a chance to respond. So this can be cast as a reaction to creatures attacking or blocking also. Responses can be cast on any player's turn. They can be in response to any other spell being cast, and you can actually respond to your own spells if you want to. Players basically take turns responding to spells clockwise from the player that's cast the spell. And once a player has basically said that they're not going to respond to a spell, that once they have passed, they're not allowed to respond again. That pretty much covers response spells, so let's move on to elemental spells. These are actually the easiest spells to use because they can pretty much be cast at any time. As you'll see here, we've got one of our elemental spells, Electrocute, up here in the top, and you can see it's got like a little fireball, lotus petal type thing here in the top. Elemental spells can be cast during both of the spellcasting steps, and they can be used just like a response spell can. So the only time that an elemental spell can't be cast is pretty much during the resource step and the discard and draw steps. Other than that, elementals can pretty much be cast anytime, and these are pretty much the way you're going to deal most of your damage other than attacking with creatures on your turns. Speaking of creatures, let's actually jump into what creature spells do. You can see we're using Gorvax the First Dragon here again. Creature spells can only be cast during the spellcasting steps, so the first or second spellcasting steps, they can be used. Creatures cannot attack on the turn that they come into play, but they can block on the turn that they come into play. Basically, the player that's blocking chooses how and if their creatures block. If a creature takes more damage than their defense, they will die. And damage that's dealt to creatures dissipates on the discard step, meaning that if the creature was not dealt lethal damage and doesn't go to the discard pile, it's going to have all of its defense again at the start of the next turn. The last kind of spell that we're going to go over are variables. Now there's a couple of different types. Variables that stay in play are called constant variables, and constant variables can only be cast during the spell casting steps. They're placed on the dueling grounds in the constant variable zone. Variables whose ability takes place as they are cast are called temporary variables. And the cool thing about temporary variables is they can be cast during either of the spell casting steps or any time a response could be played. So they pretty much can be played any time as well. That pretty much covers the different types of cards that we have. Hopefully now you kind of have a little better understanding of how each card can be used. Again, you can always go back to this and pause to go read the steps in the order that they're listed, or you can always go back to the rules. The rules have all of this listed as well.